Hi, everybody.
Cool.
Scott Fuller here, founder of leavingthebayarea.com. And in our journey to continue to provide you with relevant information in an ever-changing market, I wanted to bring on one of our partners, Brandon Leitner with Cresa. He's a senior vice president in the leasing division for office space. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you give us, maybe like a 60-second overview of your background and what you do, so people kind of understand, the perspective that you're coming from.
Sure. Sure. So I'm a commercial real estate advisor with Cresa, and at Cresa we exclusively represent tenants or occupiers of real estate. I've been focused in the Bay Area for the past 5 years, but with Cresa I've been with them for about 14 years, and I cut my teeth in Boston, where I spent the first 9 years of my professional commercial real estate career.
So you've had some experience on both coasts, right? Which I'm sure has helped you to get some pretty good insight as to what's going on nationwide and everything else.
Absolutely. And even today, my clients kind of take me everywhere. Although they might be based in the Bay Area, we service their office and space needs throughout the country and the world, for that matter.
Okay, fantastic. So Brandon, maybe we can start off. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of new developments with COVID and, changes in, office infrastructure or corporate infrastructure for employees and things like that. But let's maybe back up pre-COVID. What were you seeing in, the Bay Area market, prior to, let's say, February?
Sure. Well, really, it was still the era of good feeling in the Bay Area, where we were kind of in a period of record high rents. We were starting to see a little bit of softening in Q1, believe it or not, with a little bit of an uptick in sublease space. And really what attributed to that was a lot of companies had overbought space in the couple of years leading up until about March 2020. And I think part of that was there was such low vacancy, and for scaling companies, and if they wanted to have the opportunity to grow, there was a lot of strategic leasing where they wanted to make sure that they didn't box out their opportunities to expand.
Yeah.
So companies were taking a little more space than they needed with the anticipation that they would grow into it. And I think that that's where we saw a lot of sublease space hitting the market, being offered at flexible terms, where companies would lease space for 10 years and sublease it for 3 to 5. And really they were, for a while, breaking even on their subleases. So it was really a healthy market, single digit vacancy, all-time record high rents.
Yeah. And a lot of optimism at that point, right? I mean, companies are thinking, we're growing, we're scaling, we want to, plan for the future today.
Yes, absolutely.
So now that we've we've gone through the COVID, I guess we're still technically in it, but what are you seeing? I mean, what has changed? And I think we kind of maybe want to break this out into 3 markets in the Bay Area: San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Oakland. Because my guess is that, they're operating a little bit differently, and some are maybe benefiting more than others. What are you seeing right now? What has changed in these markets?
Sure. Well, I think it's safe to say that they're all interrelated. And really what was happening pre-COVID was this trend of urbanization. So there was a real focus for companies to try and, establish their beachheads or headquarters, for that matter, in San Francisco, then into Oakland. And of course, Silicon Valley remained really strong as well. Because really the Gen Zs and the millennial workforces wanted to have that live, work, play kind of atmosphere. So it was really pushing a lot of demand into the cities. And I think, post COVID, and once we kind of got into this, it's kind of put a freeze on all demand, naturally, because we're all sheltering in place, and you can't really kind of go out there and acquire new space. But then what's starting to happen, and what we're seeing right now, is everyone's rethinking the workplace. So I guess, what was your first question, so I can maybe answer it either market by market or?
Well, it's pretty much, where we're at today, and we'll kind of get into what the future forecast looks like. But today, what are you seeing as far as, your clients' feedback? I mean, what are people saying out there? What's the general consensus? Or are they just kind of sitting tight, not sure what's going on? Or are you seeing some dynamic changes today?
Well, I think it's safe to say that it really is a case-by-case situation, but overall, the general sentiment, and where I've spent a lot of my time over the last 3 months, is advising our clients on how they could, stay afloat. And really, most companies are looking for ways to reduce occupancy costs, and they were trying to understand what their options were in a time where they couldn't utilize their space. So they have no utility for a space that they can't enter. So first, they wanted to understand, what does our lease allow us to do? Is this force majeure? Can we use business interruption insurance? Are there ways for us to get rent abatement? So really, a lot of companies went through, I think, an initial stage of panic, and they wanted to understand what they can do. And this was before the government really stepped in, creating, subsidies and PPP funding. And then in San Francisco and other cities in the Bay Area, these moratoriums on evictions and the ability for the smaller businesses to defer rent. And that's really what we've been doing, is helping companies figure out ways to either defer rent or start entering into restructures of their leases.
Is there a lot of concern out there with not just your clients, but what you're hearing overall with tenants, concern about, being able to continue making the lease payments? Are they trying to renegotiate potentially out of a lease? What are you seeing there?
It's a little bit of both. So the retail market, which I don't really have a strong focus on, they got hit the hardest because they're really dependent on foot traffic and people coming into their physical brick and mortar locations. But with the offices, there certainly was a concern. Will they be able to maintain their rental payments because revenue is going to be down? So for these early stage companies, there is a real concern. Can they continue to grow? Can they continue to meet their lease obligations? However, I think some of that's been mitigated by some of these government subsidies, which have kind of helped band-aid their way through this.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I think companies are a bit concerned as to what their long-term, staying power in the Bay Area is going to look like, especially if they sign, long-term leases at these record high rents. And as we'll talk about in the future, I think that they're starting to think things might look different in this post-COVID world.
What's the consensus with the property owners right now? I mean, is there expectation that they're going to continue to get paid? They're going to continue to, their tenants will stay through full lease terms, or, where are they at right now?
Well, a lease is a legally binding contract. So the initial kind of feedback from the property owners and landlords are, you have a lease, which means that you have an obligation to pay rent. We have found that many landlords are willing to work with tenants to try and mitigate these short-term damages if they can, but usually it's via rent deferral. I have very limited abatements being offered to tenants. There's been some lease restructures if your lease is turning in the next 12 to 18 months. But for the most part, everyone is holding strong because they really don't know what the next few months are going to look like. So landlords have been reluctant to even put a new price out on the street. So if you were to call for pricing, they're reluctant to give you an asking rate right now because they really just don't know what the new market rents are going to look like. And a lot of that is being driven by this sublease phenomenon, which we've seen in the last 3 months, with over 2.5, close to now 3 million square feet of new sublease inventory, which represents about 40% of all vacancy in San Francisco is sublease availability now.
Wow, it's a big number. So, we're starting to see some data points that are pointing to trends from urban to more rural. And, companies, and we're seeing this in the residential market as well. People are kind of looking at, do we stay in San Francisco? Do we move out to, Marin, to the East Bay? Are you hearing any of that on the streets with companies who maybe, if they have the option to, the lease is coming up, are they looking maybe to move out of San Francisco or even the Bay Area?
Yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of that. I think the first and foremost, companies are trying to protect their employees. They're worried about employee safety. So I think that they're trying to create procedures that will allow people to be comfortable coming into work. But certainly with the early stage companies, where I think that the capital markets, venture capital, debt equity, it's going to be a little more challenging to continue to raise money. They are looking for ways to improve their balance sheets, and they're really starting to evaluate whether they need to be in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. And they found that they've been pretty successful with work from home. And I think that they are, I wouldn't say they're encouraging their employees to seek other markets to live in, but they're certainly not telling them not to. I think that they're allowing their employees to move and maintain their jobs, even if they're not going to be in San Francisco long term.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon because you have the early adopters who have already kind of taken on this remote work stance, and then you have a lot of companies who may be forced into this. Like you said, they're not necessarily looking for their employees to relocate, but they, to stay competitive, they're probably going to have to offer some sort of package. So what we're seeing is, for a lot of people who are given the option to work from home, it then begs the question, well, where is home going to be for me if I have that flexibility? How do you see that, changing the dynamics of, of companies and the demand for office space in San Francisco? Do you see a significant shift coming over the next couple of years based off this remote work from home, phenomenon we're seeing?
Yeah, I think as it relates to the office market, what we've certainly seen and what we anticipate over the next 12 to 24 months, it's been a big kind of exercise of pumping the brakes because companies really want to evaluate what their employees want, how efficient they could be, if they can improve profitability. So no one is making long-term commitments right now. They're really reluctant to do so. And landlords in turn don't want to commit deep concessions into these spaces, whether it be tenant improvement allowances, free rent, on long-term leases if they don't know that these tenants are certainly going to be there for a long period of time. So I think what we are starting to see is companies are more willing to negotiate shorter term extensions if they're going to stay, or what they're doing is just delaying their decision making as far out as they can.
So Brandon, I'm going to ask you to put out your crystal ball here, which nobody likes to say what they think is going to happen, and frankly, none of us really know. But what are your thoughts on, obviously, the restaurant industry has been hit pretty hard in San Francisco, and this was pre-COVID. I mean, they were having a hard time making ends meet, prior to this, and this has really just kind of accelerated that for them. Also, retail, there's been a lot of pressure on those segments. So, obviously, now that we have office demand changing, what are your expectations for, for where we're going with pricing in, not just office space, but leasing space? Are you going to see a lot of downward pressure on pricing, both on sale and on leasing for, office and commercial overall in San Francisco?
Absolutely. So as it relates to, the capital markets and these office sales, I mean, these buildings were trading at all-time highs, in some cases over $1,000 a square foot. And I won't say the building, but there's a building in San Francisco that sold for over $1,000 a square foot 18 months ago, and now it's under agreement again at a number that's closer to like $750, $800 a foot. And a lot of that's going to be because some of these buildings were underwriting, current market rents, or sometimes it was good to have vacancy, but in a post-COVID world where we just don't know what it's going to look like, and there could be more substantial vacancies and older spaces that need to be highly improved, I think that you could expect that the building values are going to come down a bit. And from a leasing perspective, you have a couple of different things that you have to compete with. One, it's this sublease phenomenon that we talked about earlier. When you've got 5, 6, 7 million square feet of sublease space that's going to be on the market, a lot of it we haven't even seen yet because companies are waiting until activity picks up. Keep in mind, we can't conduct open houses right now, and it's limited tour activity, as a lot of people are sheltering in place and a bit nervous to come, on an office tour. I think that when you have sublease space where someone has no future value for it, they're going to discount their rates 20, 30% from what they were paying previously. That's going to put downward pressure on rents. And then, of course, with tenant demand shrinking and, whether or not tenants keep the same size office or a larger office, and you can make the argument that maybe companies will stay the same because in a post-COVID world where we were once open plan, maybe a need for some more private meeting spaces or 6 feet of social distancing can be necessary. I think that we're in for a price reduction, certainly. And I think, we'll start seeing that happen later this year. And then I think throughout 2021, I don't see any recovery in the San Francisco leasing market until 2022 at the soonest. And that would be the same probably for Oakland and Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a good point with kind of you talked earlier about the Band-Aid. We've got the PPP funds and, all the money that's kind of floating into it. Once that runs dry, or if that runs dry, then we're going to kind of see how this whole thing pans out. The other piece of it is, what is the future office going to look like? So I think you mentioned this the other day. If you have 1,000 square feet, do you now have to have 1,300 square feet to accommodate for social distancing, to accommodate for a completely different plan and improvements that have to be made to the space? It seems to me that that could pinch a lot of companies, and having to go in and redesign and come up with different concepts, for when their employees are coming back. Do you see that being a big challenge for companies?
I think potentially, and it really depends on the type of company and what their foot traffic looks like. I will say though that as far as like the new installation of PPE to keep people safe, I think a lot of these companies might delay that expenditure because I think they want to see how quickly we get a vaccine. Are people's children going back to school? In which case they can come back to the office. And what we might see, and I know that some of our larger clients, what they're doing is they're going to establish what they call neighborhoods within offices, where you'll have certain groups come in, 2-3 days a week, and in between there'll be heavy sanitization going on, to make the spaces safe. So I think that they might avoid some of these drastic changes, and they're just going to focus on really sanitizing and just controlling workflow based on what people want to do. Because I do think that a high percentage, believe it or not, of employees do want to return to the office when they can.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's nice to be able to work from home, but after a period of time, it's like you want that professional interaction. You want to get back in front of people. And I think that's the ultimate goal for a lot of people and a lot of employers, right? Is to find the safest and quickest way to get people back in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brandon, what advice would you give, if somebody's watching this call and, they're kind of in a sticky situation, what advice would you give them, to, help them kind of make it through? What are some of the things that you're saying to some of your clients?
Sure. I would say the first thing is call your tenant advisor, because there are always opportunities inside of your lease or even outside of it to find ways to, navigate through these challenging times. I would also say that don't always take, the short-term fix. Come up with a long-term strategy. And I know it's really hard to do when you're not sure what the workplace is going to look like, where your employees are going to be, what subsidies will be available. But I think what you don't want to do is lock yourself into a long-term commitment that may not work for you 12, 24 months from now, but really kind of valuing what you need the most right now to keep your business running. What I always tell my clients, you don't want to let your real estate run your business. You want your business to kind of run your real estate needs. And that's where we really want to create, and align your real estate with your business plan. So I would say seek out the professionals, and honestly, on both sides of the fence, whether it be your landlord or your landlord's brokers, we're all trying to work together to get through this, because your landlords are hurting too. Our job as tenant reps are really to get the best deal for our clients, but these landlords have debt service obligations, and I think people have to just be conscious and cognizant of that. Is that they have debt commitments and loan commitments as well. So we have to find a middle ground that kind of works for everyone, and that's really important, to just be able to see things from both sides of the table.
I think that's super important, Brandon. I think you nailed it right there. It's just the ability to negotiate and be flexible and find a solution that is, little give, little take, because that's a necessity moving forward, right?
Absolutely. We're all in this together. Just like the Bay Area, all these markets are in it together. Quick example, because you'd asked me about Oakland as an example. There was some big press in the Bay Area. Kaiser, they reneged on their obligations to move forward with the lease in Oakland, but Oakland got bailed out because just this week, PG&E decided to move their headquarters into Oakland.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas Oakland, as a leasing market, is struggling a little bit because San Francisco's struggling, and there's a lot of good value subleases and big blocks coming available. There's still a need for people to have office space in the East Bay. And I think what we might see moving forward too is a hub and spoke model, where you might have headquarters in San Francisco and they'll have smaller offices in the East Bay. And I think that kind of further broadens into other markets, as you were asking before, where maybe you keep a smaller presence in the Bay Area and you open more regional offices in other cities outside of the Bay Area, as companies look to kind of reduce occupancy costs in California to allow their to allow their employees that are now working remote to still have a place to come and collaborate. And some of the larger portfolio clients are starting to evaluate those options.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, we were seeing this pre-COVID. A lot of companies were kind of testing the water, so to speak, in some different markets. Maybe moving, a piece of their operations somewhere else outside of California to see how it would perform, potentially short term, or potentially longer term is possibility of moving more operations that could make them a little more cost effective, right? Help their bottom line. So
yeah,
certainly dynamic. Brandon, this has been great. Anything that we've missed that you think might be of value to our viewers that you'd want to mention?
No, I don't think so. I think I would just encourage everyone to stay safe and stay positive, and we will find a way through this. And San Francisco, the Bay Area as a whole, has always rebounded pretty quickly. It's a strong market. We've been through dips before. It will come back, but what it looks like could be completely different. We're an innovative, society and an innovative region. There's a reason people want to be here, but it'll be a very interesting 12 to 24 months. And I think that people, their best abilities, if they can be patient, there are really good opportunities for those that can wait and kind of navigate through these troubled waters.
Yeah, and I think that we just, on top of that, we have to just be very creative, right? There's a lot of companies that are getting hurt right now, but this is also, I think, an opportunity for companies to innovate, to restructure, to refocus their business and their marketing, who can come out stronger after this than they were before, because it forces, a lot of companies to redefine, elements within their business. So I think a lot of companies will really shine in this. So Brandon, thanks so much for your time. This has been great information. And I'm assuming if anybody has any questions, regarding, your business that you provide through Cresa, they could contact you. Is that right?
Absolutely. We'll talk to anyone. We're here to help.
And you guys are nationwide, not just, your focus is in the Bay Area, but, your representation goes all across the US. Is that right?
We are the largest tenant rep brokerage firm in the world. And we do have offices in pretty much every major city across the globe.
That's fantastic. Okay. Brandon, great to catch up, man. I really appreciate it. This has been awesome. And we'll catch up with you soon. Thanks everybody for taking some time to watch with us today.